Welcome to Stories by Roshko. Title: Shadows of the Mind. The wind howled outside as Tarana shifted restlessly on her bed. The room was cold and quiet, the silence broken only by the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. She had slept most of the day, but it hadn't been restful. The sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of pink and purple. From her window, she saw a figure moving toward her porch, clutching a coat tightly around him and carrying a bouquet of flowers that danced in the harsh wind. It was Andy. Her breath caught, and her chest ached. Andy. She watched him approach with careful, deliberate steps. But it couldn't be. Andy had died. She remembered the sound of his fall, the way the world had fractured when he fell from the balcony. It had been a cruel, irrevocable moment. And yet, here he was, knocking lightly before letting himself in. "Hello, dear," he whispered. His voice was the same, soft, familiar. But it unnerved her now, filling her with unease. She flinched as he came closer, replacing the wilted flowers in the vase with the fresh bouquet he'd brought. His movements were methodical, almost ritualistic, as if this moment had played out 100 times before. "Did you take your medicine?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned away from him, closing her eyes tightly, willing him to disappear. But his presence lingered, hovering just on the edge of her reality. When she opened her eyes again, it was dark. Her mother stood by her bed, urging her to come downstairs for dinner. Tarana complied, moving through the motions of eating without tasting a thing. "Andy asked me to tell you, he won't be visiting tomorrow," her mother said quietly. Tarana nodded, her face expressionless. Days passed, and Andy didn't return. The ache in her chest grew heavier. "Mom," she asked one evening, "did Andy fall off the balcony?" Her mother froze, her face betraying her before she composed herself. "He's fine, honey," she said gently. "You're hallucinating again." "Hallucinating," Tarana repeated, her voice hollow. Her mother nodded. "We'll see the doctor tomorrow. You'll be fine." The following day, the psychiatrist smiled at Tarana during their session, his tone warm and reassuring. "You're improving," he said, scribbling notes in her file. But Tarana didn't feel better. The diagnosis of schizophrenia, which is a mentally challenging ailment, felt foreign, detached from the reality she lived in. She wasn't sure what to trust anymore, her memories or the people around her. The thin line between her imaginations and realities seemed to disappear. On the ride home, her mother's voice pierced through the haze. "Tarana, Andy is getting married," she said, her tone measured but firm. The words hit her like a physical blow. "No one can help you until you decide to help yourself," her mother added, her voice softening. "Honey, talk to me." Tarana didn't respond. She couldn't. Tarana sat on her bed staring at the moonlit window. The sky had shifted from pink and purple to an inky black sprinkled with stars. The echo of Andy's soft voice lingered in her mind. She touched her face where his lips had brushed her forehead, a ghostly kiss that felt too real to dismiss. The confusion and fear that had gripped her for years were beginning to thaw, replaced by a faint glimmer of hope. She thought about the conversation with her mother earlier that evening, the tension in her voice when she mentioned Andy's name, and the way Andy seemed both real and intangible at the same time. Tarana looked at the calendar pinned to the wall. The days blurred together, but she grabbed a pen and circled today's date. One step forward. Her psychiatrist had said this countless times, but it never stuck until now. Perhaps, deep down, she wanted Andy to return, not as a haunting figure, but as the person who had once made her feel alive. She opened her journal, a habit her therapist encouraged, and began to write. Today felt different. Andy came back. Or maybe he didn't. But it doesn't matter. I think I'm starting to come back to myself. The snow falls quietly, and for the first time, I feel a little peace. I know the road ahead is long, but I will keep walking. For myself. For the girl I used to be. She set the pen down and leaned back, gazing at the snow-covered garden outside. She felt a faint flutter in her chest. Hope. The sound of her mother's soft knock startled her. "Tarana, are you okay?" she asked. "I'm fine, Mom. I really am." Tarana managed a faint smile, even if it didn't reach her eyes yet. Her mother peeked inside and smiled. "Good night, honey. I'm proud of you." She closed the door quietly, leaving Tarana alone in her thoughts. For the first time in years, Rahana didn't feel haunted by Andy, by her illness, or by the weight of her past. She hugged her knees to her chest and whispered softly, "I'm coming back." As the night deepened, Tarana allowed herself to hope. And hope, as fragile as it felt, was a beginning. As snow fell softly outside their home, Tarana made a decision. She began to take her medicine willingly. She went on long walks, wrote down the dates of her doctor visits, and tried to rebuild the connection with her mother. Slowly, the numbness began to lift, replaced by flickers of hope. Still, the memories of Andy lingered. She couldn't make sense of the gaps in her mind or the way his presence felt so real, so tangible. One evening, as she descended the stairs for dinner, she heard her mother's hushed voice in the living room. She turned the corner and froze. Andy was there, looking thinner, more fragile than she remembered. "Hello," he said softly, stepping toward her. Tarana's legs didn't move properly, but before she could think, carried her into his arms. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she clung to him. "Where were you?" she whispered. "I was waiting," he said, his voice breaking. "Waiting for you to understand that we can't help you until you decide to help yourself." "You'll be fine," he promised, brushing a tear from her cheek. "I will never leave you. I thought you were getting married." "I couldn't," Andy gasped out. And for the first time, in what felt like an eternity, Tarana believed him. In the days that followed, Tarana continued her journey toward healing. With the unwavering support of her mother and the renewed presence of Andy, she found strength she never knew she possessed. The line between reality and illusion began to blur less frequently, and she embraced each day with a newfound sense of purpose. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the snow-covered garden, Tarana sat with her mother and Andy, sipping hot cocoa. Laughter filled the room, a sound that had been absent for far too long. In that moment, she realized that while the past held its shadows, the future was hers to shape. And with her loved ones by her side, she knew she could face whatever came next. Moral: healing begins with acceptance, self-compassion, and the courage to face one's reality. The unwavering support of loved ones can illuminate even the darkest paths, but true recovery starts from within. Thank you. Please subscribe for more stories.